This week's episode of the Rural Woman Podcast is brought to you by the patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast. This amazing group of individuals contribute financially to the Rural Woman Podcast to ensure the stories of women in agriculture hit your earbuds each and every week. Want to join them in supporting the stories of women in agriculture while getting access to extended episodes, patron-only episodes, and other great perks? Head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more about how you can become a patron through Patreon. Hi, I'm Caitlin Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman Podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman Podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey friends, we are celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Rural Women Podcast this year, and we are taking a look back through the inspiring stories that have been shared with us throughout the years. Looking back through these interviews, there are women who have been successful, who have persevered, and who have been resilient. There are women who have shared their stories who may not farm or ranch or homestead or work in the business that they used to. Things may be different for them now, but I know their stories have impact. And I hope that this is a solid reminder for those of you who have shared your stories or who are inspired to share your stories. Our stories are forever changing, and just because we may not farm, ranch, or homestead the same, our lives might not look the same. There has been growth here. Through the good, the bad, and the ugly, I think it's a solid reminder for all of us to look back to see how far we've come. So my friends, I hope you enjoy these throwback podcast episodes coming your way, and thank you for being here and for helping me celebrate the incredible stories of women in agriculture through the Rural Woman Podcast over the last 5 years. Enjoy. Today, you'll meet Jenna Brown. For those who are unfamiliar with you, Jenna, tell us who you are, where you're from, and how you got your start in agriculture.
Well, like you said, I am Jenna Brown. I am originally from Cheyenne, Wyoming, was born and raised there. And I went to school down in Colorado. I was not raised in agriculture. I was raised in the quote unquote big city of Cheyenne. But I had tons of friends who were in agriculture and plenty of family who was in agriculture. But my mom worked in the energy industry and my brother works in the energy industry. And so that's what going to college I thought was going to be my life too. My thought was I was going to go into the energy industry. And once they were done either mining or, drilling for oil on the land in Wyoming, because that's the biggest part of Wyoming's economy is the energy industry. I thought my job was going to be to put the land back to the way it was before. And that was my plan. And that worked out for 2 years after college. So not very long. And I had no idea that I was going to be in agriculture, but I am now. And I feel like I'm at times drinking out of a fire hose, but it's been great.
That is a visual that I'm sure many have just had and thought, yeah, I can understand that. I can relate to that. Tell us more about your new position and all of the fun work that you get to do with the farmers in Montana.
I am, like I said, I'm a soil conservationist, the big title that I had no idea what it even meant when I applied for it. But no, I'm a soil conservationist, and I get to work really closely with the farmers and the ranchers. We get to work with them on their day-to-day operations and just trying to incentivize them to do better farming practices than maybe what their grandfather says is correct. Because that's not always correct. You know, the NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, who I work for, we started because of the Dust Bowl. And Hugh Hammond Bennett, the father of the NRCS, he wanted to create an agency that would help farmers improve their soil rather than degrade their soil and cause another Dust Bowl. And so that's kind of what my position does, is we're basically trying to prevent another Dust Bowl. It sounds easy, but it's not super easy, because there is a lot of producers that are not quote unquote progressive in their farming techniques. But I try again to convince them otherwise. And so we have our soil health principles that we try to educate producers on. You know, we hold seminars and we hold workshops. Tomorrow we have a meeting with producers that we get to just sit down and talk to them. And so it's really cool because I get to work with a ton of producers in my county, just helping them try to improve their soil and try to improve their farming and make their farming more efficient and more productive.
Today, you'll meet Kate Kavanaugh.
Yeah, well, my name is Kate Kavanaugh, and I was born and raised a city slicker like you. And I was born in Denver, Colorado. And I think from an early age, I was seeking a different level of connection. And that really was the guiding force behind my journey that eventually led me into agriculture. And I started out a very young vegetarian. When I was 5, I made the decision to be a vegetarian, and my parents supported me. And I think that a lot of that was from a sort of disconnect with where my food came from. And I carried that vegetarianism with me for a long time. I carried it with me until I was about 20 years old. And when I was 20, I was having a lot of health issues. And I just had this little voice at the back of my head that kept calling me to go back to meat and eating meat. And I finally decided to listen to it and wanted to be closer to any meat that I was going to eat, having had this background with being a vegetarian. And so I started visiting farms and ranches, and that led me to being a butcher. That was the way that I felt I could best connect in those early years. And I opened up a butcher shop with my husband in Denver, Colorado in 2013 called Western Daughters. And that started me off on a whole journey. Really started looking at human health in conjunction with this. And I went back to school to become a nutrition therapist and to kind of marry these two concepts of land health and human health. And it led right into my own little journey with my own small farm homestead here in upstate New York.
I told you all that it was a very interesting and compelling story. I'm curious, when you had made this transition and were looking, pursuing education and becoming a butcher, what was the reaction of people around you and your loved ones that have known you your whole life as the girl who loved Babe so much she decided she wasn't going to eat meat anymore?
It's funny. I think that a lot of people, while they were surprised by the trajectory that it took, I've always been the kind of person that jumps fully into things and with arms wide open, just wanting to go to the very deep end of the pool and learn everything I can. And so I think in that regard, it did not surprise some of the people that were closest to me. And I did it with, at the time, I had just met my then boyfriend and now husband. And this was a part of our journey together too. And up until that point, it had really just been me and my mom. I think maybe like you, I had one of those childhoods where I had I connected more with animals than I did with people. And part of that enjoyment of walking into the goat barn and feeling no judgment, only the deep love that comes with giving something hay. And so I think that there was just an honoring of my process of just being an all-in kind of girl.
Today, you'll meet Elise Ferguson.
I actually grew up in Wisconsin, right on the border. So what I thought was a small town, it was almost a suburb of Minneapolis, St. Paul. So I didn't have any farm background or anything. We had gardens in our yard, flowers on the border and things like that. But my parents weren't really into gardening a whole lot. My grandmother knew what every flower was. She could identify everything. I had always done computers. And so I just said, well, I'll just work in computers. So I started working in computers. And then by that point, I met my husband, and his family was from the complete opposite side of the state, nearly the South Dakota border. So we're in southwestern Minnesota, and his family was farmers. He never really expected to ever get into farming, maybe until it was an emergency. But when we had kids, he decided that he would like to move back to the farm town when the kids started school. He didn't want the kids to go to school in the big city. And meanwhile, his grandmother went into the nursing home. So we ended up buying her place, which was just right outside of town. It's just 30 acres, about maybe 12, I think, is the building lot, then the tillable around it. So we purchased that and we moved here. So last year, he comes in to me and he says, how do you feel about a really big purchase? And we do a lot of other things in our life. And at that moment, my thought was, he's buying more video games because we own an arcade. Well, no, he wanted to buy land. So I'm like, okay, I guess that sounds like a good idea, maybe. And so they decided that we would buy 180 acres, like 188 or something. And then my brother-in-law would buy another 120 or something like that. And then there's another 80 that was like disjointed, and my father-in-law would buy that.
So one other thing that you've recently added to your plate, on top of all of the other things that you already do, Elise, is launching a podcast. So tell us about your newest venture into podcasting.
Yeah, because I have about 5 minutes a week where I'm not doing everything else. I decided it would be great to have a podcast. And it kind of, it's a selfish endeavor because we got thrown into our business of running a movie theater in 2021. And last year we opened a candy store, and they're just, to me, I didn't have like resources or like a sounding board for like starting a small business or running a small business in a small population rural area. It's not, I wanted to hear people talk about small towns and how to run a business in a small town. And yeah, there are similarities for sure, but there's also going to be unique things to a rural business than there are to something a little larger. And I like listening to podcasts that have like a discussion feel to them more so than just here's how you do X, Y, Z. And it's just me talking for, I could talk for days, but I don't know. I'm sure nobody wants to listen to me do that. So I thought, well, let's start like a roundtable sort of discussion podcast. And you know what? If nobody listens to it, at the very least, I get to just talk about business with these other business owners. And, I'm sure there's at least one other person out there that wants to listen to it. So it's going to be called now watch me trip over my tongue, the Rural Retail Roundtable. And I'm starting to regret that name because it's so hard to say.
Today, you'll meet Kendall Ballantine.
Like so many good stories, it started with a guy. So I had been at probably 26. I was ending a relationship that was really not doing good for me. It was really like a toxic relationship, and I had a really tough separation. Fast forward maybe a year or so, and a girlfriend of mine was introducing me to somebody new, and I was really not in a position that I didn't want to be dating again. And she was like, but he's such a great guy. Anyways, I ended up falling for Jay, who is my now husband. And he was, at the time that I met him, he was retired from agriculture. He's a 5th generation bird farmer. And I was pretty disconnected to where my food was coming from. I was going to the grocery store and buying my food and really falling for all of the like greenwashing labels that exist when you are buying food at large grocery chains. And I decided that I really wanted to try my hand at raising some chicken for our family. I had the privilege of having this space to be able to do it, and it wasn't being used. And Jay was like, okay, well, like you can do it, but you're going to have to do enough to offset your costs. And I was like, that's fine. And I came home from work. I was working in a super corporate. I was director of operations for a large multinational transportation provider. And I came home from my like really stressful corporate career, and Jay let me know that he had set me up with chicks, like my first batch of chicks. I was not planning to be a farmer. I was just wanting to produce some of my own food. And I went out to the barn and I opened up the door, and there were 500 baby chicks inside the barn, which was way more than what I was planning to produce. Jay now admits that he thought that I was going to do that one batch of birds and then absolutely despise farming, not want to do it, and that we were going to be eating that like same frostbitten chicken 10 years in the future. I ended up doing that first batch of chicken. And in my past life, I was really into doing marketing, and I was writing a blog at the time, and I was pretty into social media at the time. And so I started selling this chicken on social media and telling people that I was farming. I ended up probably 7 years ago leaving my corporate job, and it was like a really well-paying, super stressful corporate job to farm full-time. And I haven't looked back since.
This kind of goes into the marketing side of things for you. How do you go about talking to your customers and consumers about the actual price of growing food?
I am incredibly transparent. So if you follow me on Instagram, you know I share every detail. And I think that's why we've been able to grow a community of customers that are so loyal to us. We are so lucky as a farm. I didn't know until I got into farming. And I think that's part of the unique thing when you are a first generation farmer, is that I didn't know what I didn't know until I got into agriculture. So whereas other farmers that are maybe multi-generational, Jay doesn't see it necessarily the same way I do, because he's just like, of course, that's the way it is. Like, of course, it's really expensive. Of course, the margins are really low. So he doesn't think to talk about those things the way that I do as a first generation producer, where I sit there and I'm like, but people don't know this. Like, you know this because you've been doing this for your entire life. But when I used to go to the grocery store, or if I had gone to the farmer's market and looked at those prices, I would have no idea just how like razor small those margins are, and just how tough it is for farmers to be able to produce food in these communities.
Today, you'll meet Jessica Mose.
Yeah, so my name is Jessica Mose. My husband and I live in central Alberta, where we raise our 2 young sons, grain farm and with his family, and run my business, Prairies Soap Shack. It's where I create all natural skin and body care products using different wildcrafted or homegrown plants from our farm. We live and work in the country and play here too. We both grew up on farms and both took time living in the city when we first got married. He was up north working in the oil field and I was a home care nurse. But as life goes on, transitions come, and we always knew we wanted to end up back on the farm. So here we are. And for sure, happy to be raising our family in this setting.
Just your curiosity of what the plants do and what they were used for and how you can use them. I love that curiosity about you. And obviously that has grown into such a passion for you. So how did you start learning how to make soap and different other body products? How did Prairie Soap Shack start for you?
Yeah, so I'm definitely interested in the homesteading lifestyle, I guess you can call it. The gardening, the food preserving, the fermenting, scratch cooking, the baking, natural living, which products we're bringing into our home. So I really like to make things on my own. And it was just one day my mom said, I'm surprised you haven't tried making soap yet. And I just kind of looked at her and I was like, yeah, you're right. I should try that. I should try that too. So they like reading and books. So first I started there. I got some books on how to make soap. Then I went online, watched a bunch of videos and did reading online, talking with other makers on it. And then finally I felt confident to get the supplies. And probably 11 o'clock at night when my babies were sleeping, I would be up in my kitchen with my dog watching me. My husband was probably working away at the time, and just starting experimenting on my own. And then I started formulating all my own recipes and just really developed a passion for this art of, well, it's like art mixed with science when you make soap. And that just filled my creative cup. So I guess I basically taught myself how to do it through lots of experimenting. And eventually I had so much soap in our house because I just kept making soap. And then I thought I better start selling this if I want to keep making it, because we really don't need hundreds of bars of soap here. I'm gifted already to all of my family and friends. So that was kind of how my business started, was just, oh, maybe people would be interested in if I sold this. And then right away, with like paired with my other passion at the time of using native prairie plants and all natural colors and natural scents, all that just kind of merged into creating my business off the get-go. And yeah, a perk of rural living is that my small town supported my new venture so much, and they still do. That was such a huge perk of starting my business when you live in a small town, and I've grown up there and your community is so supportive. So that was really great when I first started out.
Today, you'll hear from Arlene Hunter.
So my name is Arlene and I live in Eastern Ontario, Canada. And I was one of those kids who started off by being born on the farm. So that's an easy start because you don't have any choice. So I grew up on a dairy farm. My dad farmed with his two brothers. And then as we kids got older, my mom got involved in the farm as well. And then us as we grew up. So yeah, we were on a dairy farm quite close to the city of Ottawa. And then as I grew up, I was also one of those kids who said I would never marry a farmer. I was not interested in that life, and especially a dairy farmer, because, as you know, they have to work all the time. So I went away to university, and I don't think I was trying all that hard to get away from farmers, because I went to the one university in Ontario where all the Aggies are. I didn't take an agriculture degree. I took my degree in geography, but of course I met a farmer, and a dairy farmer at that. And so we ended up dating and getting married. So we ended up actually not that far from where I grew up. I'm under an hour's drive from the farm where I grew up, but now we're on my husband's family farm where his family's been. I always mess this up. I'm pretty sure he's 6th generation. So that makes our kids 7th. So his family's been here for a very long time. And now myself and our kids are part of this farming family.
What are people struggling with when it comes to parenting and raising a family on a farm?
I don't think anyone will be surprised to know that, it's the same as our suburban or urban counterparts, finding balance and trying to juggle it all that kind of stuff. But some of the things I already mentioned, like how do you incorporate your kids into your lifestyle without pushing too far, how to keep your kids safe, because we talk all the time about my electrician. If they showed up with their kids in tow, or my plumber, or my, even a salesperson, if they showed up with their children, I'd be kind of curious or maybe concerned about their ability to do their job. And yet there is this expectation a lot of times in agriculture that we can do our jobs and our kids can just be along for the ride all the time. And the reality of that is, it's not always safe. We're working in dangerous environments, and there's, like I said, everyone has their own dynamic and their own economic realities. But that picture of the perfect farm family usually is everybody's out working together. And sometimes the perfect farm family is somebody's at home feeling resentful because they're not actually able to contribute on the farm because they're in the house with the kids, and maybe someone else is in the field or in the barn feeling resentful that they don't have any help, but they know that it can't get done if the kids are all there, right? So it's that balancing act that we're trying to figure out.
Today you'll meet Hallie Ammann-Ekstrom.
My name is Hallie Ammann-Ekstrom. My husband and I live in southern Minnesota, where we actually farm with my dad. We run our cow-calf operation, and I'm a sixth-generation cattle farmer. So it's super exciting, and especially to be a woman in ag, I'm pumped to be able to follow the footsteps of my family and keep that going. I'm actually the first female of those six generations, so well, it's exciting. It's also kind of nerve-wracking. I'm not going to lie. It's kind of a weight on your shoulders, kind of having everyone watch and see, what we're going to do differently or the same as the years kind of go with the family farm.
I'm curious to know, with your family and growing up, was it ever, did you ever think this was going to be what you were going to be doing? Did you think that you were going to be the next generation to continue your family farm?
No. So as you pull up down our driveway and pull up to our cattle farm, there has always been, as far back as I can remember, a big family farm century sign with all the generations' names on it. And there's a spot below my dad's. And I always thought, oh, yep, like there's the 5 men, like there goes my brother's name. Like, it'll go down there, it'll fit great. And never once did I think like, oh, that's going to say Hallie under it, or that I was going to own half the herd. Like I said, it's so weird how things work out. It's like no matter how hard you try to control it or how hard you vision it, somewhere your path gets a curve put in it and you roll with the punches and unexpected things, good and sad, happen. And it's like, yeah, I really do think that things work out. And it sounds cliche, but what you want and what you want to work for, how hard you want to work for it, is what you'll receive and, get in return. And so for me, I just thought, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I honestly thought I'd have a full-time job, but wouldn't ever come back to the farm. I never pictured living in a big city. I always kind of thought I'd stick with the small community, but I'm not really sure if I ever thought that I'd 100% be back to the farm, but grateful that I am. It's just crazy where it's taken me into different experiences and people I've met because of it.
Today, you'll meet Lisa Miller.
Well, mine is kind of a long journey. We'll say it that way. It started off, I grew up in Silicon Valley, but where I grew up was, the neighborhood I grew up was it was kind of half rural, half suburbia. So, but my story actually kind of goes a little bit further than where I grew up. It starts when I was actually in elementary school. When I was in elementary school, we did this little project, where you grow beans in egg crates. And that fascinated me on a level that I've never grown out of. Fast forward a few years, and like about maybe 5 years from that. And my grandfather started getting ill, and he came from Tulsa, Oklahoma to live with us. And my grandfather had a 10-acre homestead. So when my grandfather came to live with us for a little bit, he went into the backyard and he saw this pathetic garden, and he got mad at my mom, chewed her out. And then she's like, "That's not my garden." And he goes, "What do you mean that's not your garden?" And she's like, that's the baby's garden. That's Lisa's garden. And so I'll never forget, to the day I die, the look on his face. He turned and looked at me. And from that point on, he started teaching me how to garden. The years went on. He passed away, unfortunately, but the years went on, and I got into my career. Of course, I grew up in the Silicon Valley, so where my career was headed, and got busy with life. And it wasn't until my mid-30s that seed that my grandfather planted in my heart started to sprout. And I finally started to want to grow my own garden. And it actually started off with just flowers. I just thought I wanted to grow some flowers and blah, blah, blah. And then that progressed into vegetable gardening and into homesteading.
Talk to us about when you got to your current operation now, what it was when you got there and what it's transformed into now.
Oh boy. When we first moved here, there was nothing. I mean, and when I say nothing, I mean like zero infrastructure, nothing. It was just a field of 2 acres. So we had to do everything on this homestead. We set up a 3,200 square foot garden, and we have currently 30 chickens. Yeah, we have 30 chickens currently. We've got soon to be 4 turkeys. We have 2 turkeys right now. She's sitting on two more. So we've got finally our little turkey operation going. We've got a rabbitry. We keep rabbits for both manure purposes and for meat purposes as well. That's something that we've taken with us from the city life. That's currently what we have set up right now.
Today, you'll meet Karen Dean.
Like I said, I'm from the east coast of Canada in beautiful Nova Scotia, which if you've never been, it's worth the trip. It's a beautiful place to visit. And I am a former dairy farmer. We sold our farm just over 11 years ago. And I now have a hobby farm, what I call my therapy farm. I actually registered the business name Feel Good Farm. Haven't done anything with that business yet, but it's ready and waiting. And I'm a solo mom to 3 children. I am an author. I have a Canadian best-selling book, which I'm super proud of. And what else do I do? I'm a motivational speaker. I'm a coach. I kind of jack of all trades, do whatever I can to try to live my own dreams and pay my bills.
That's amazing. I think that is probably the definition of an entrepreneur. I will do anything to pay my bills.
Yes.
So I want to talk about, the end of your marriage. This is something that we discussed before we hit record. Divorce in agriculture is something that can be kind of taboo, and it's something that we don't talk about a lot. Divorce happens. We live in the age of 2023, and unfortunately, sometimes things don't work out for one way or the other, whether it's good or bad. But divorce in farm families is a big deal in the sense that you're not only a family unit, you're also a business. So talk to us about that time and walk us through, what you're willing to share.
Our divorce happened very quickly and abruptly because of a situation that was really hard to deal with as a family. And I was thrown into, I have to figure out this farm on my own with no one to help. And because of the circumstances of the divorce, his family was not willing to help me either. It was turned into a whole family dispute. And I had 3 little kids, and the oldest, I guess not little, the oldest was 14. And I'm trying to deal with this with no support. And I think sadly that happens in a lot of situations where it was his family farm. I'm the outsider, and the outsider is the one who gets blamed for all the things, when none of it was actually my fault. And it was really hard. And it was hard for my kids because they knew that life was going to change dramatically. They knew that because of the circumstances, we would have to sell our farm and that we would be starting fresh again. And as I said, he was my second husband. So we had already started fresh once with my 2 older kids. It was really, really hard. And it's still hard because I still live in the same community. I still am surrounded by the people, by his family, and the stories that have been told over the years that are not true. But I have not defended myself within the community because I just thought, you know what? I don't have the breath or the energy for that. And I'm going to live my best life, regardless of the stories that people care to share. I feel the stories they share reflects more on who they are than who I am. And it's been the biggest growth I think I've ever had in my life is the last 11 years of this and figuring out how to parent my kids completely on my own, how to, raise them to be good humans and contribute to this world in a positive way. And now my kids are 25, 22, and 15, and incredible humans, incredible. Like, I'm so proud of them. And that was the goal for me. I didn't care what else happened as long as my kids were happy and good humans.
Today, you'll meet Amanda Burzynski and Erin Golden.
Erin, I grew up very far away from here. I grew up in about an hour outside of New York City in a very suburban neighborhood, shops and restaurants. Everything was close by. So I grew up there. And then when I graduated, I moved out to Pennsylvania, which is definitely more of like a rural setting. And I went to college out there. And so I essentially moved out of my house when I was 17 and moved away from home. And I never really went back after that. So I've been on my own for quite a while. I graduated, I went to a liberal arts college out there and graduated in 2007. Then did a bit of traveling, eventually ended up here in rural Alberta. And the way I ended up here was when I was traveling abroad, I did about 3 weeks traveling in Europe and met my husband abroad when we were traveling together. And my husband said, "Come to Alberta." And I said, "You know what? I'm fun. I'm not change adverse. Let's do it." So I made an international move from that life into where we are now. And I've been here ever since. So
the rest is history. All right, Amanda, you're up.
My turn. I'm the 6th generation on our family farm. And so the Weavers settled in Lloydminster in 1903. And I am back here now with my kids, who will be the 7th generation. I grew up on our family farm. We have grain mostly, but we are now dabbling in cattle a little bit. And so I really kind of honed my love for agriculture without even knowing it. However, I never saw myself going into agriculture. I wanted to be a teacher from the get-go. I have 3 brothers, and I would line 2 of them up and give them their little workbooks for the day and force them into playing school with me from a very young age. And I really saw myself as a teacher and nothing else. But I still got my education degree, and then I moved back to Lloydminster and I started teaching. I had met my now husband then, and he is a heavy-duty mechanic at our ag dealer here, but he also farmed at the time with his family and now mine. So I still lots of ag in my life, but I was dedicated to teaching. But I realized I worked in a school that had no farm families in it. And it was just a very interesting experience from someone that just was so closely tied to agriculture, just seeing how much these kids didn't know about anything. And so that kind of started my interest in teaching more about agriculture and sharing more about agriculture. And I was always so shocked at how my stories would wow them about just basic little things that just to me seemed like everyday life, but wasn't at all. And so after we had our first son, I kind of had to take a step back and look and decide if I was more passionate about education or agriculture, because doing both was getting to be juggling and it was hard to manage. And so I went back teaching after our first son, and after our second son, I went back again. But after we had our third son, I decided to stay home and farm and spend more time raising our kids the way that I was raised. We're farming more and more as well. So I have more of a role that way too. So I've stepped away from education and stepped more into a mom role and our farm.
Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer. A special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre and Carrie Munven from Laystone Farms. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at The Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story. Did you know that you can get this same great episode of the Rural Woman Podcast ad-free? I get it. Listening to ads during a podcast isn't always my favorite either. But in order to keep the lights and coffee pot on here at the Rural Woman Podcast Studios, they are necessary. I am so grateful to each and every one of my sponsors, but if you yourself would like to skip the ads while supporting the show, consider joining me over on Patreon. Patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast get ad-free episodes starting at Tier 5 on their podcast player of choice each week, plus some other great benefits. Find out more by heading to the link in today's show notes to learn how you can become a patron through Patreon.